Have you had an I deserve better moment in a relationship? What was it? When I expressed concern over his drinking habits, he slapped me hard enough that he knocked me off the chair. I realized I did deserve better than an alcoholic. Not as traumatic as some other responses, but it did end with us breaking up. It was this past Christmas and LD put hours of thought and effort into his gifts. Couldn't wait to see his face light up, which it did. He gave me what looked like a free coffee mug, and it was like a smack in the face how little he cared about me. It wasn't the dollar or gift per se, it was what it represented. He was utterly indifferent to my feelings. The last straw of many straws that broke this camel's back. Coming out of hospital for surgery and finding out instead of coming to help look after me as he promised, I was unable to walk on my own, he was out drinking with friends. When my ex kicked me out of our flat because I was having a panic attack and he didn't know what to do, he physically grabbed me and threw me out, then threw a coat at me and then my handbag. I was sobbing the entire time. It was like something out of a dark comedy sitcom. When I walked into my ex-boyfriend's house to surprise him on Valentine's Day to find my best friend prancing around half naked, he told me it was all my fault and proceeded to dump a full beer on my head while they both pointed and laughed at me. Yep. I walked out and never looked back. I'll be damned if I spend any more of my life being humiliated and treated like garbage by people like them. When I asked him to buy me some tampons, I asked him where he put it and he said in the cabinet, so I looked through all the cabinets in my apartment and stupid me realized that there's no tampons. I asked him if I was looking for nothing and he sent me a smiley face with a halo on top. I was done completely. That night went to bed early, peacefully. Continuous lying to protect me. Nah dude. You lied to protect yourself because you knew I'd want to leave if I found out again. When he yelled at me for spilling water on his laptop, after I already profusely apologized and said I would buy him a new one if it were broken, it wasn't broken. Or when he didn't respond to my questions, I'm talking really basic shit like what do you want for breakfast, and instead played on his phone and ignored me. Or when he didn't stand up for me to my parents. Or when I had to be the one to initiate every serious conversation. Or when I tried to take him somewhere for fun and he spent the entire time complaining about how hot it was. It took all that and more before I was just emotionally exhausted and tired of feeling like I was his mom and not his romantic partner. I realized I deserved better when he didn't stand up for me while his family made racist jokes at the dinner table, and didn't bother to check on me after I left the table in tears. When he told me he doesn't like talking to me, I wasn't his friend, just his girlfriend. I had a boyfriend who would feel jealous if I hung out with my friends without him. I would invite him for this reason, but one night, my best friend's girlfriend was throwing a small holiday dinner for her close friends. He wanted to be invited, but I didn't feel comfortable inviting him because it was going to be a small, intimate get-together, not a party, and she was uncomfortable around him. The next day we had a fight about it. It went something like this: me, you should be happy that I am having fun with my friends, him, not if I'm not there, and that was it. Those were the words I needed to hear. It all came crashing down at that moment. There were many red flags before this moment, but this is what did it for me. When I was told that what I'm asking for is a burden, I said, TM asking for bare minimum, you make that feel like a burden, and he said that is a burden. I rushed my parents on a day they were spending with me on their vacation so that I could spend an hour with him before he went on a trip. As I had promised, I showed up and he was sloppy drunk and yelled at MNE for why didn't you bring me foo 00OD. Never mind the fact that I had a long day with my parents and a long drive to see him, and because L arrived late at night there was no parking, so it took me 30 minutes to find parking. No 00. What mattered is that my child brat boyfriend wanted me to also drive somewhere to bring him food, even though in the time it took me to drive and park, he could have just ordered delivery and had it there long before I arrived. It solidified what should have been obvious before: he didn't want a girlfriend, he wanted mommy fuckmaid. A mommy who cooked and cleaned and fucked him, who he could yell at and order around. My value as a human was having my vagina up for demand and then wiping his ass when he takes a poopy. That's it. I walked out and that was that. Stupid Hollywood had me believing he would chase me and apologize and change, but nope, he just said fine, go. He really never gave two shits about me, ever. I started getting physically sick from the stress of constant betrayal, lethargy, insomnia, vomiting, and shaking. When he pushed me to go to therapy because there was so much wrong with me, according to him, The therapist told me he was emotionally abusing me. Years ago I had a brief month or so thing with a guy friend of mine. I was home for Christmas break and we spent a lot of time together. We had had a couple dates over the previous couple months when I was home from college on the weekends and we had a great time together. We had a great New Year's Eve and our first kiss at midnight. I thought everything was great and I had fallen super hard for him. IHE day I was going back to school. I went to his place to say goodbye and I'll see you next time I'm home. But something was off. He was distant and wouldn't talk to me much and it felt strange. All he said was, "You shouldn't date me. There are things going on that you don't know about." Or something like that. So L left. I stood outside leaning against the side of his house and thought, don't deserve this. I was heartbroken but knew I deserved better. Years later I learned that he had been doing drugs and in hindsight I was better off not being with him. It's kind of funny though, he is actually one of my husband's best friends so I see him fairly frequently. He got clean and is married to a fantastic woman with 2 amazing little girls whom adore. I am so happy that he got his life together. There were so many, but one clue was when my mom, who was my best friend, died very unexpectedly, and instead of being the supportive boyfriend, he acted like I was being psychotic when I was lying in bed crying by myself, which was less than 24 hours after it happened, mainly because L wouldn't sexually please him in the midst of my intense life-altering grief. B had a meltdown because I wasn't giving him enough attention/affection. 1 was actively planning a fucking funeral for my dead mom. C had another meltdown when he found out I had called my ex-Mill, daughter's other grandma, who had been in my life over 12 years at the time and I had a great relationship with, despite the divorce from her son, just to let her know what had happened. He claimed I should have thought about how that would make him feel. I still don't get it. All of these were just surrounding one traumatic event. My grief and his manipulation kept me in that relationship a few more years, and there were a lot more examples, but the above made me realize deserved much better. I just didn't have the strength to act on it yet. I never once asked my ex to be vegan or change his ways. I'd even go to his favorite steak restaurants and settle with fries and pasta with sauce. I tried to have an open mind but when it came to me he didn't. There once was a vegan festival that comes by once a year and it would have meant the world if he went with me. Instead, he stood outside the venue and was like, "I am waiting outside, text me when you're done." As I sat in the grass alone eating a seitan sandwich I waited for 45 minutes alone. Man, screw that. That's when I knew. I never want to be with someone not supportive anymore. We even went to my favorite vegan restaurant and complained there was no meat, just couldn't handle that anymore. When I got screenshots showing my then boyfriend had cheated on me for the 3rd tin that week, called him, told him to drop of my things and that we were never to see each other again. I was so naive back then. When I heard the words "I will punch you in your fucking face." Every time he yelled at me. Every time he didn't come home until 3 a.m. after I worried about him for hours. Every time he would say we would go out for dinner, he would pick an expensive restaurant, and then slide me the bill after. Every time he would talk crap about me to my family and then they would tell me all that he said. Every time I had a migraine or was sick but he would tell me that he felt worse so I had to take care of him. Every time he would listen to music in his car so loud it hurt my ears but refused to turn it down. Every time he drove like a crazy person and knew I was terrified after being in a bad car accident. God, I hate him and I'm so glad I left. If you feel like you deserve better, you do. Nobody deserves to be unhappy or to be treated unfairly. My grandfather was in a coma and his wife was going to pull the plug the coming weekend. I had a severely sprained ankle, was on crutches and couldn't drive, and wanted to go say my goodbyes. That weekend happened to be the release of an expansion for an MMO my ex and I played, and he wouldn't take me because of that. I managed to get a ride from a family member, but that made me realize that while I would do anything for him and would have been there to support him were the roles reversed. For him I was basically a roommate that he had sex with. I was not important to him in the same way he was to MNE. We'd been together for 3.5 years. I asked him where he saw our relationship going, if he saw marriage in our future or not. Previously whenever he screwed up he'd always come to me and tell me that he was gonna marry me someday. He'd ask me to look up the cost for a Disneyland wedding so we could save for it. He'd tell me his mom had her mother's ring set aside for me. Future faking. I had never asked before. He was always the one to initiate future talks. I asked this time because I had a feeling he didn't want to be together anymore, but he didn't want to move back in with his parents. He said, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know what's gonna happen next month. I don't know if my truck is going to break down again, or if I'll be able to pay my bills. I don't know. Elle asked, do you just want to break up then? I wasn't being mean about it, it was a genuine question, trying to make it amicable. He didn't answer and pretended to fall asleep. We wound up staying together for like 3 more months, during which time he had 2 friends move into our spare bedrooms to help them out, and then he broke up with me cause he thought they'd help pay rent. Joke's on him, they didn't pay shit. He also cheated on me during this time, but he didn't really see it as cheating because he planned to break up with me. I had started trying extra hard during those 3 months to salvage the relationship, so even though I saw it coming, it still hurt. He went out of town for a week to visit family and did not attempt to contact me once, also never once responded to my attempts. My graduate school graduation was during this trip. He felt zero remorse for not talking to me during this time and for not being at my graduation. He never even said a word about my graduation when he returned. I brought it up casually and his response was, oh yeah, how'd that go? Went F***ing great. Now I'll take my degree and good paying career to a man who will actually appreciate it. And I did. When I realized that my boyfriend and his best friend were closer than I was comfortable with. She would call when we were together, and if he didn't pick up she would call continuously until he did. She'd show up at his workplace and house randomly. She'd wake me up at 2/3 am by calling his phone because she was driving and bored. His phone would always be lighting up with novel-sized texts from her. It was like we never actually had any private time because she was always blowing up his phone. She also never wanted to meet me and admitted to him she was jealous when we started dating. It was like my boyfriend had 2 girlfriends. On Valentine's Day when we were in bed together, I looked over and saw my face on his phone. She was trying to FaceTime him. On Valentine's Day. We never FaceTimed LOL, and he never told her no. Now no female besties are one of my top boundaries. I was dumb for staying as long as I did, but lesson learned. Never again. When I got home after a 3-day trip, and found my apartment, where I arrived with my unemployed boyfriend and his elderly father, covered in dog shit and piss, dirty laundry everywhere, a stack of dishes overflowing from the sink, because he refused to do any of the cleaning. I worked full-time and was a full-time student, yet my ex couldn't be bothered to stop playing video games long enough to walk our dog or do any cleaning around the apartment. I looked around at our apartment, which was so filthy it was unhealthy to live in, and realized I couldn't live like that a single day longer. Andy deserved better. I broke up with him that afternoon, and immediately moved out. I spent one afternoon packing my stuff, and then never set foot in that apartment again. My life is immensely better without a partner who can't be responsible for their own life, never mind responsible for sharing a life with mine. He rarely asked me how are you. Something so small can make such a difference to someone's day. I would have to ask him to do it and he never would. I can't remember the last time he asked me it. Hasn't even asked me after we've separated. I know this is nothing compared to others' comments, but it's the bare minimum. If you don't get the bare minimum, you deserve better. Once you realize it, you think back and understand they never cared. When my husband didn't have my back during the pregnancy, it took some fights, but he has improved on that front. When for the millionth time he didn't include me in his decisions, knowing that I was just an add-on to his life and not a partner at all. Before that it was barely a fling, but he moved and ghosted me for a month before contacting me since he was in town and wanted to meet up, which just met hookup. I told him off for that, then didn't talk to him again. Had a fever of 104, doctors suspected early-stage Lyme's disease, and he went out partying and didn't come home till 3 a.m. I was delirious and in no state to drive myself to the hospital, and I still had to wait for him to sober up and sleep it off. When my ex left me by myself in the Twin Cities, with no car/ride home, all because I told him he should slow down the drinks that night. He was a mean, cruel drunk. When I picked up the phone to an angry customer of his who was furious he'd sold her cocaine cut with flour and he'd better bring the money back or LD be the example. I had also found out that morning he was having an affair with a married neighbor. It ended with me stupidly confronting him that night when he came home and our neighbors and roommate were out of town together. I'm lucky all I got was slapped and was able to get away and go hide in the neighbor's yard with their big dog who didn't like my ex. It's also when I realized name-calling, raging out, and verbal and emotional abuse are also abuse and just a precursor to violence. I waited until he left the next day, contacted family, and was gone by the time he got home. Good fucking riddance to bad garbage. He was an older man who'd pulled the whole "you are so mature for your age/age is just a number" crap on me as a teenager BTW. He later admitted he targeted me because women his age wouldn't put up with his crap. I'm asexual and also did not have an interest in having sex at all. I was sexually abused by my ex who didn't and refused to understand my boundaries. I finally found my voice and learned how to say no a year and a half into our relationship and dumped his ass. I had a friend of 20 years who was also combat veteran as a roommate. He owed me lots of money due to back rent and paying for things he couldn't pay for. He was having major mental health issues and couldn't keep a job. He'd done some damage to my home and in turn, did lots of damage to our relationship. He'd finally started school and was getting money to pay for his living arrangements through school. He decided, after our big fight, that stressed him out too much to go to school and he just didn't go. I found out on a Monday. I told him that by Friday he needed to provide his plan on how he was going to pay his rent. Not even act on it, just tell me his plan. Friday passed, and I finally saw him on the following Monday. I asked him if he'd made a plan and he shook his head, so I handed him his eviction paperwork. I realized I was paying someone to abuse me, and I just was not okay with that. This was in 2019. We have finally started rebuilding a friendship, but that only has happened because he took control of his mental health. I still know Lee made the right decision even though it was, and still is, the hardest choice I've ever made.